timeless tales of love, wars, and tragedies. The tragic love story of Paris and Helen of Troy. According to Greek mythology, Paris, the handsome and charismatic son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy, was destined for greatness. However, before he could fully realize his fate, the gods played a cruel trick on him. The goddess Eris, the bringer of discord, threw a golden apple into the midst of a divine gathering, inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, three of the most powerful goddesses in Greek mythology, immediately claimed the apple. Unable to decide, they turned to Paris, known for his beauty and wisdom, to judge which of them deserved the prize. Each goddess offered Paris a tempting bribe. Hera promised him power and dominion over all of Asia. Athena offered him the wisdom to lead and conquer, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love, promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, swayed by Aphrodite's offer, awarded her the apple, unknowingly setting the stage for a tragedy that would span decades. Paris and Helen's fateful meeting. Helen, the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta, was renowned across the ancient world for her unparalleled beauty. However, Helen's marriage to Menelaus was not without its own complications, as she had many suitors vying for her hand. When Paris arrived in Greece as part of an official diplomatic mission, he was welcomed by Menelaus and the court of Sparta. In a twist of fate, Paris and Helen met, and despite Helen's loyalty to her husband, Paris's charm and Aphrodite's influence overcame her resistance. They fell deeply in love, driven by a passion that seemed as if it had been written by the gods themselves. Paris, now enthralled by Helen, made the fateful decision to elope with her, taking her away to Troy. When Menelaus discovered his wife's disappearance, he was consumed by rage and grief. The loss of Helen was not only a personal betrayal, but also a political disaster. Menelaus, determined to reclaim his wife and restore his honor, called upon the many Greek kings and warriors who had once pledged to protect Helen under an oath. This pact, which bound them all to defend her honor, now compelled them to launch a massive military campaign against Troy, the Siege of Troy. The Greeks, led by Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon, gathered a vast army, setting sail for Troy with a fleet of 1,000 ships. The city of Troy, under the leadership of King Priam, prepared for the inevitable siege. For 10 long years, the two sides clashed in brutal warfare, but despite their best efforts, the Greeks could not breach the mighty walls of Troy. Paris, though a skilled warrior, was largely overshadowed by the great heroes of the Greek and Trojan armies. Legendary figures such as Achilles, Hector, and Odysseus became central to the conflict. Throughout the siege, Helen remained in Troy, torn between her love for Paris and the guilt of the destruction she had caused. Her beauty, once a blessing, now seemed a curse, as it held both her and her city in its grip. The fall of Troy. The Trojan War finally reached its tragic conclusion through the cunning of the Greeks. After years of failed attempts to break into Troy, the Greeks devised the strategy of the Trojan horse, a massive wooden structure hiding Greek soldiers inside. The Trojans, believing the war had ended and that they had won, brought the horse into the city as a symbol of victory. That night, the Greek soldiers emerged from the horse and opened the gates of Troy to the rest of the Greek army, resulting in the fall of the city. The death of Paris. Paris, Prince of Troy, earned infamy during the war by killing Greece's greatest hero, Achilles, with an arrow guided by the god Apollo, striking him in his vulnerable heel. Yet Paris could not escape his fate. In Troy's final days, he was mortally wounded by an arrow from the Philoctetes. Gravely injured, Paris sought help from Oenone, his first love, who had the skills to heal him. Bitter over Paris leaving her for Helen, Oenone refused to aid him. Paris succumbed to his wounds, and Oenone, overcome with grief, later ended her own life, deepening the tragedy of Troy's fall. After Troy's fall, Helen was taken by the Greeks, but her fate was not as tragic as Paris'. She was returned to Menelaus, her husband, who, though still deeply hurt by her betrayal, decided to forgive her. Despite the devastation caused by her actions, Helen's beauty remained legendary, and her story would live on in song and story as one of the greatest catalysts of war and strife. Number 2. The tragic love story of Antony and Cleopatra. In the wake of Julius Caesar's assassination, the Roman Republic was thrown into turmoil. The power vacuum left by Caesar's death saw the rise of three powerful leaders, Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, forming the second triumvirate to rule Rome. Among them, Antony, a seasoned general, and Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, were allies at first, but tensions soon began to simmer beneath the surface. The rise of Antony and Cleopatra's love. Mark Antony's influence grew as he solidified his power through military campaigns in the East. It was during one of these campaigns in 41 BCE that he met Cleopatra, the captivating queen of Egypt. Seeking her support in the war against Parthia, Antony was drawn into Cleopatra's world. Their first meeting was marked by Cleopatra's strategic charm, intelligence, and ability to captivate. The two formed an alliance that transcended political necessity. Soon they were lovers, bound by both desire and shared ambition. By the end of 40 BC, Cleopatra had given birth to twins, a boy named Alexander Helios and a girl named Cleopatra Selene II, both of whom Antony acknowledged as his children. They also had a third child, Ptolemy Philadelphus, who was born about 4 years after the twins, Antony's marriage to Octavia. Before his fateful meeting with Cleopatra, Antony had been married to Octavia, the sister of his political ally Octavian. This marriage was a shrewd political move designed to strengthen the bond between Antony and Octavian, ensuring a more united front in the face of Rome's enemies. Octavia, a respected and noble figure in Roman society, acted as a political asset. As wife to Antony, she helped maintain peace between him and her brother, Octavian, and also served as a key advisor in Rome, overseeing affairs in Antony's absence. But despite his marriage to Octavia, Antony's love for Cleopatra began to dominate his actions. In 32 BCE, Antony divorced Octavia, a highly controversial decision that weakened his relationship with Octavian. Antony's public abandonment of Octavia was seen as a betrayal of Roman values, especially when it was clear that his focus had shifted entirely to Cleopatra and Egypt. The political consequences were dire. The Battle of Actium and Antony's decline. By the time Antony and Cleopatra had solidified their alliance, tensions between Antony and Octavian had reached a breaking point. Octavian seized on Antony's relationship with Cleopatra to portray him as a traitor to Rome. The rivalry culminated in the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, a naval confrontation where Antony's forces were decisively defeated by Octavian's fleet. The loss effectively ended Antony's hopes of controlling Rome, and his fate was sealed: the death of Antony and Cleopatra. Following their defeat at Actium, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt before going their separate ways. Antony to Cyrene to raise more troops, and Cleopatra to the harbour in Alexandria. In 30 BCE, as Octavian's forces advanced, Antony received a false rumour that Cleopatra was dead. In despair, he fell on his own sword. Mortally wounded, Antony was brought to Cleopatra's side, where he died in her arms. Overcome with grief, Cleopatra negotiated with Octavian for a dignified burial for her lover and hoped to secure the throne for her children. However, Octavian was determined to humiliate her and seize Egypt entirely. Realizing there was no escape from the inevitable, Cleopatra chose to end her life. She allowed a venomous asp to bite her, bringing her story to a tragic end. The political aftermath. The tragic deaths of Antony and Cleopatra mark the end of both the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt and the last vestiges of Roman republicanism. Octavian, the undisputed ruler of Rome, took control of Egypt and consolidated his power as the first Roman emperor, taking the name Augustus. Number 3. Tristan and Isolde. Long ago, King Mark of Cornwall ruled without a queen or heir, but named his nephew, Tristan, a loyal and talented knight, as his successor. Tristan was renowned for his skill in swordsmanship and music, and his deep devotion to his uncle and the kingdom. One day, a bird delivered a single strand of golden hair to King Mark. Enchanted by its beauty, Mark declared he would marry only a woman whose hair matched it. After a search, they found Princess Isolde of Ireland, whose hair matched perfectly. Despite the enmity between Cornwall and Ireland, fueled by Isolde's uncle Morholt's death at Tristan's hands, Mark sent Tristan to escort her to Cornwall for their marriage, the dragon and Isolde's hand. When Tristan arrived in Ireland, he was met with hostility. To prove his worth, he faced a fearsome dragon that was terrorizing the countryside. After a fierce battle, Tristan killed the dragon and presented its head to Isolde's father, King Gormund, who honored his promise and allowed the marriage to proceed. However, Isolde's mother, Queen Isolde the Elder, had doubts about the match due to the age difference and secretly brewed a powerful love potion. The queen intended the potion to ensure that Isolde and the old enemy king would fall in love with each other, and also hoped that if her daughter bore a son, he would become King Mark's successor. The love potion. A love potion is a magical drink from folklore and mythology that causes someone to fall in love. While sailing to Cornwall, Tristan and Isolde accidentally drank the potion, mistaking it for wine. The magical potion bonded them in a deep and uncontrollable love, even though Isolde married King Mark as planned. Despite her loyalty to Mark, she and Tristan began a secret affair, drawn irresistibly to one another, discovery and exile. The affair was eventually discovered when jealous nobles, suspecting the truth, planted rumors in Mark's ears. Heartbroken, Mark set traps and spied on the lovers, eventually catching them in the act. In a fit of rage, Mark condemned both to death for treason. Tristan escaped and rescued Isolde, and together they fled into the forest of Morrow. In the wilderness, Tristan and Isolde lived in peace, their love untouched by the politics of court. However, Mark eventually found them. Seeing them together, with a sword between them as a sign of their respect for him, he hesitated. Moved by their apparent innocence, he allowed Isolde to return to Cornwall, while Tristan left, heartbroken. Tristan travelled far from Cornwall, eventually seeking refuge in Brittany, where he tried to rebuild his life. In time, he married a noblewoman named Isolde of the White Hands, though his heart remained with Isolde of Ireland. A tragic end. Years later, Tristan was gravely wounded in battle. Believing only Isolde of Ireland could heal him, he sent a messenger to her with instructions to return with white sails if she agreed to come, or black sails if she refused. When Isolde's ship appeared with white sails, Tristan's wife, in a fit of jealousy, lied, claiming the sails were black. Heartbroken, Tristan believed Isolde had abandoned him and died from his wounds. When Isolde arrived and found Tristan's lifeless body, grief overwhelmed her. Unable to bear the loss, she died in his arms. Stricken with sorrow, King Mark buried them side by side. From their graves grew two trees, their branches intertwining, a symbol of their eternal love, forever united in death. From historical truths to mythical legends, these stories are a fascinating blend of reality and fiction. What are your thoughts on these stories? Let us know in the comments.